Hi, everyone. So the ReDesign Group would like to welcome you to the webinar on youth and substance use. We're going to give you a little introduction about who we are. So the ReDesign Group employs an assistant-based approach to community development and problem solving by engaging stakeholders in the transformation process, and the ReDesign Group uses a human-centered design methodology that leverages exercises and activities to create high-performing teams to drive a community that is driven and participates with each other. So before we kind of get into the meat of the presentation, we want to do a quick little poll question with you guys. So the poll question should pop up shortly. There we go. So the question is, how long does it take you to think of a brilliant reply? So is it straight away on flash, 5 minutes later, later that day, weeks later after much pondering? So put in your responses. Okay, so hopefully everyone has put in their response, and we will kind of reflect and discuss the results later on. So now, who are these people who are talking with you? So we have the faces of the ReDesign Group. So first, I'll introduce myself. My name is Alicia Xavier, also known as the educator in the group.
And my name is Gary Newman, also known as the artist of the group.
And I'm Zora, known as the counselor.
And I'm Amanda Neal Robinson. I'm the storyteller.
And together we form the ReDesign Group. And as you can see, we have a Gmail account, and we also have Twitter where you can follow us and get a little bit more information. So together we've worked over 30,000 hours. So that's a collaborative number within underserved communities across Ontario. This has provided us with various experience that allow us to share with you resources and tools to support youth that you work with dealing with substance use. So what is today all about? So first of all, expect the unexpected. This may not be your regular webinar that you're used to. We're hoping to engage you and provide you with a lot more insight. As a collaboration, we provide diverse thoughts and reflective learning. However, please keep in mind that we are not experts in all fields of study, or are we medical professionals? And in some situations, when working with and dealing with youth with substance use, it is advised to consult an expert or a medical professional. This webinar is a reflective practice webinar. We will provide framework for our participants to generate and foster advancements in emerging best practices. The value of research into risk and prevention factors for youth substance use and the need for improved evaluation practices for substance use programs will be highlighted throughout. Now we're going to bring it back to the discussion from our original poll, just to get everyone. So results, let's see. We have quite a few people who come up with their brilliant ideas right away. 5 minutes later, 35%. Later that day, 40%. And then weeks later, we have 6%. So the reason why we kind of wanted to start with this is for you to kind of start thinking about a concept we like to call the brain blink. So what happens to your brain when you're having a brilliant idea? We call it that aha moment. So it actually dates back in the 90s. Two cognitive scientists started studying the insight of that moment when you're unable to see things or you get stuck on a problem, that eureka moment. So the scientists found that milliseconds before the endorphins of that brain kind of gets that moment, our brain actually shuts down. Our brain's visual area takes a little bit of a break. And in that moment, our solutions hit. So they called that the brain blink. So the importance of being less reactive and more proactive when working or dealing with youth with substance use is that brain blink. We need to allow our brains to blink to ensure that we are creating these brilliant ideas to share and help our youth foster. So as we begin this webinar, it would be great for you to shut your eyes so it can help you see. I know a lot of my coworkers are really good at, using that time to brain blink and to process and to let information go. And they're also going to provide you with a lot more tools and how you could shut your eyes but still see.
Perfect. And in terms of responding, let's see if we're ready to respond this morning. Before exploring the value of psychological safety between practitioners and clients, let's enter a phase of looking at our physiological safety. For each of the following items, reward yourself with 1 point. Great. So if you're well rested and woke up naturally and not by a disturbance, give yourself 1 point. If you've nourished your body with something beneficial, it doesn't have to be as elaborate as this, an orange or an apple will do, give yourself 1 point. If you're hydrated or have access to water, and let's just reflect on the privilege we have to have access to clean drinking water, give yourself a point. And thinking about your morning, if your interactions with others were pleasant, or you've had some sort of resolve with any conflict, or are able to pack it away until later, give yourself a point. Lastly, your commute. So if your commute was smooth sailing, or you've accepted the chaos of Toronto traffic and train delays, give yourself a point. So now I'd like you to total up all your points. If you have 3 or more points, you have the foundation to establish. So yeah, you guys can put in your tally on the poll. Perfect. Thank you for submitting that information. If you have 3 or more points, you have established the foundation to establish psychological safety. If not, no worries. Later in this webinar, we will introduce a tool to pack away hectic pre-work disturbances in order to effectively respond to client needs. So 25% of audience members had 5 points, 67% have 3 or 4 points, 8% have 1 or 2 points, and for 0 points, it's 0%. So taking this concept of physiological safety, I'd like to move into psychological safety. So the Harvard Business Review recently featured an article by Dr. Laura in which she looked at the impact that psychological safety had on teams. What her research found was that psychological safety increases creativity, moderate risk-taking, and strategic thinking. The head industry at Google, Paul Santiago, did a massive 2-year study on team performance and found that the highest performing teams have one thing in common: psychological safety. The belief that you're not going to be punished when you make a mistake. Although this is a tech giant that we're looking at, and they believe that this concept creates behavior that leads to market breakthroughs, I think us as practitioners can use a similar concept to achieve breakthroughs with clients. Barbara Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina has found that positive emotions, trust, curiosity, confidence, and inspiration broaden the mind and help us build resources to be more open-minded, motivated, and persistent. When we feel safe, divergent thinking emerges, which is the cognitive process of underlying creativity. How do you do this with your client? The first step is you actually have to think of yourself and your client as a team. I recommend you to look into Canadian psychiatrist and family counselor, Dr. Carl Tom, who has a concept called ethical postures. Once that's been established, taking the approach that conflict is a collaborator, not an adversary. So here we would kind of implement motivational interviewing, roll with resistance, and really seeing the value that conflict has. The second step is speak human to human. So they do a reflection called Just Like Me to try to build compassion between practitioners and clients. So looking at the reflective activity that this person has beliefs, perspectives, and opinions just like me. This person has hopes, anxieties, and vulnerabilities just like me. This person has friends, family, and perhaps children who love them just like me. This person wants to feel respected, appreciated, and competent just like me. And just like me, this person wishes for peace, joy, and happiness. So you can do that reflective practice with your client. It's called Just Like Me. And it helps us to speak human to human with other people. The next one is to anticipate reactions and plan counter moves. So knowing your client and being client-centered is vital to have this. And I find that using Myers-Briggs codes really works in being proactive with clients. Number 4, replace blame with curiosity. So John Gottman's research at the University of Washington shows how blame leads to defensiveness and eventually disengagement. This emphasizes being client-centered again, and the importance of adapting a learning mindset with your clients, knowing you don't have all the facts and engaging them in exploration. So using a tool like Johari's window and asking for solutions. The 5th stage of this is asking for feedback on delivery. We all have blind spots in working with clients. So in counseling practice, I use the ORS-SRS scale to kind of measure how sessions are going and increases trust. Lastly, it's important to measure psychological safety, whether it's doing a survey or a check-in. Some questions at Google include, how confident are you that you won't receive criticism if you make a mistake? That's vital to ask when working with young people in ending substance abuse.
So following up with what Zora has said, we realized that high-performing teams are a key component when working with young people with substance use. And the sum of those teams are the skills of the individuals. And today what we want to do is we want to slow down and unpack a lot of what Zora has just said and improve our practice, recognizing that improving practice is a developmental process. It involves discovering what works best for our clients. We must seek out and share new knowledge and information, and we must reflect on our practice, encouraging ourselves to integrate practice-based and evidence-based practices that enhance our service delivery. So today what we're going to be looking at is how we're going to reflect. And when we're reflecting, we're going to be looking at why are things the way they are? And is there a better way to do the work that we do? So we promise a lot of reflection today by identifying situations, unpacking experiences, giving time to reflect upon those experiences, then connecting our experiences to theories that you can also look towards and use a part of your practice, and speak about our own mistakes, where we could have improved on what we did and what we would have improved upon given the opportunity to improve.
So now we're going to look at if we scored less than a 3, or even if you scored a 5, we're going to introduce an activity that will help you pack away your morning to be present and in the moment when working with young people. So I like to use a computer metaphor. Having too many files and programs open on a computer at one time interferes with any program working optimally, and the computer freezes up. Having too much in our awareness can interfere with our ability to respond effectively in the current situation that we're in. It can include us being kind of mindless and flooding the client with information that might not be relevant. So I'm going to introduce you to an activity called the container. You can close your eyes or lower your gaze. Feet planted on the ground. I'd like you to imagine a container that would be strong, secure, and large enough to hold anything troubling. It should be well constructed with a way of closing completely and locking if desired. As I begin to describe this, an image may already have come to mind. So just notice whatever that is, checking to make sure it's large enough, strong enough, and has a way of closing securely. What comes to mind? Note the color, size, shape, construction, how it closes, and if it locks. So let's go ahead and use your container. I'd like you to allow anything disturbing or troubling to go into it. You may know some of what you're putting in, but some of it you may not know about. In fact, you don't even need to know what's going in it. Some find it most helpful not to watch the items going in. Just let it go. You don't need to give this stuff your attention. We're putting it away for now, knowing it will be available later, when you have the time to deal with it effectively. Take all the time you need. And when everything is in, I want you to close this container. Now become more aware of your breathing and how your body feels. And gently allow the image of your container to fade. Take a deep breath. Exhale fully. Notice how you feel. Any tension in your body. And come back into the room. This is a tool you can use for yourself to start your day and become more present. And it's something you can use with clients as a tool to keep them focused.
All right. Thanks. That was really good. That was really good.
Thank you.
My first question is, Zora, when are you going to do a meditation mixtape? Because I think that'd be pretty cool.
Look out for it. Dropping soon.
So this is a little segment we're calling 3x3. We could have called it 3x3x3x3, but for the sake of brevity, 3x3 sounds good. So we've got 3 practitioners. We've got Alicia, Gary, and Zora. We've got 3 topics, which will be revealed shortly, and hoping to get 3 replies from you. While we're discussing these different topics, we want to know, what kind of tools are you using? What kind of methodologies are you finding helpful? And share that with our friends at YouthREX, and they'll let us know what's the online scene, what's going on. But before we get onto there, this section might prompt some questions in your mind. So if you're thinking ahead and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I got all these great questions I want to ask, we have a framework that we would really like you to use when asking questions.
So today we're going to try to encourage feedback and also promote a two-way conversation the best we can, recognizing technology and its limitations. So what we want to do today is we want to work with what we call the problem statement. If you have a question and the question can be framed as a problem, it'll help us out on our side to be able to unpack it correctly without the opportunity to ask you clarifying questions. So a problem statement looks like this. I am trying to, but because, which makes me feel. So an example of that can sound like this. I am a youth worker in Toronto, trying to engage youth to wellness activities. But programs are not focused on health and well-being because our emphasis is solely on employment, which makes me feel hopeless to help young people where they are. Take time to look at that. I am trying to, but because, which makes me feel. Do the best you can if you have a question to frame it that way so that we are actually answering the correct questions and realizing that we don't have a lot of space and opportunity to ask clarifying questions beyond. And also, look at this tool as a tool to use with your young people. When we're working with young people, one of the key things we gotta kind of unpack very early is what is the problem we're addressing. So we can get young people to begin to unpack who they are, what are they trying to do, the barriers they face, and the feelings which these barriers produce. We have done an amazing inquiry and assessment for that young person to help us do our work later on. And it also allows us an opportunity to go back to our problem statements and see where have we moved the meter with this young person. continually enhancing and improving the problem statements. So not only is it a tool we want to try to use today to kind of frame our conversation, it's also a tool you can use on your everyday with young people to frame their conversations as well.
So let's get into 3x3. And the first question is, Gary, why is it so important to be client-centered and client-directed?
All right. So what we're going to be doing today as well is we're gonna walk through 3 different case studies. I'll walk through a young person's case study. Zora will walk with another, and Alicia will walk through. For myself, I'm going to reflect upon a young person that I worked with, actually still work with till this day. Met him several years back, and what we did is that he was a young person that was experiencing issues with substance use. The main one being heroin use, and when he first connected with me, I realized that it was very important just to meet and to greet with this young person. So to sit with them, talk with them, just catch a vibe and see where he's at. This allowed me the opportunity. When I look back at it, I realized that I reflect and I say, you know what? I wasn't being his friend, and I also wasn't being a worker. I was being curious about that individual. He didn't arrive to me as substance use youth. He didn't arrive to me as a young person with substance use. He arrived to me as a young person with a name. And behind that name was the substance issues that he was experiencing. And because of that curiosity, I always had a feeling of peace and joy when I sat with this young person, and I would listen to him, and I would learn, and I'd reflect as he taught me about himself. And he taught me about himself. That allowed me to ground myself in his experience and put him at the center of the work that I was doing. This meant at times that it wasn't just about showing up at an office and sitting down for 5 minutes and going through a checklist. It sometimes meant meeting around the corner over a cup of tea, meeting down the street for a lunch, and making sure that his basic needs are being met. One of the tools that I use when I really want to get very client-centered is one we call the empathy map. And it allows for me to frame my conversations with young people in regards to what are they thinking and feeling? And what are they seeing in their world? So when they wake up, what do they see? What are the things that impact them? What do they hear? So what are the voices that have told them that they're no good or they're great over the years that act as their self-talk that actually creates their psychological safety, as Zora alluded to earlier? And then I really try to understand their pain points. What are the things that cause them pain in their lives? And then also, what are their gain points? The things that actually bring them joy. So what does success look like for this young person overall? The empathy map is one that frames a lot of those kind of conversations, and it allows for me to be client-centered. Because I'm not client-centered, I'll begin referencing other clients and tools not meant for this young person. And we do that a lot. We'll meet a young person and they will remind us of somebody, or they'll remind us of a checklist of tools. It could be assessment, this activity, this treatment. And then we get frustrated when it's not working because it wasn't for them. We didn't actually center it on their needs. Now, for myself, one of the areas I look forward to improving on that is that we weren't active enough. Young people with substance use issues, I've come to find, we got to be more active sometimes. By that 3rd or 4th meeting, we should have probably been out doing some physical activities, some paint nights, some arts and crafts, some clay, maybe an improv session, something in that regards to be able to improve that relationship and let them know more and more that it's about him, to be client-centered.
What kind of tools do you use, Zora?
So I'm going to use client Y, who comes to mind. She actually came to me for clinical counseling because she wasn't attending school, a referral from CAS. And through working with her, the first step was, of course, building the rapport, which creates higher levels of engagement that are going to help her be motivated to set some goals and actually meet them. Through getting to know her, with most of my clients, I do an assessment to see what their learning style is. So working with this young lady, I found that her learning style was visual. And through our counseling sessions, it came out that her substance misuse was a key factor in her not attending school. So knowing that she's a visual learner, we kind of mapped out her morning and saying, what do you see? And when she was in the pre-contemplation stage, she said she would wake up and the first thing she would see is her workbench where she would keep her substance. So being a visual learner and through getting to know her, she really liked affirmations. She started writing her affirmations down on the papers near her bedside, seeing them every single day while she's still using substance. As we worked a little bit more using motivational interviewing, and I did use a genome map so we could physically see different aspects of her life and her family, we came to find out that mom suffered from depression and anxiety, which this young person started to explore. Maybe those are some factors that are encouraging her substance use. As she moved to the pre-contemplation stage, we started moving around some stuff in her room that she would see when she first woke up. So putting her stuff in the drawer so it wasn't a trigger as soon as she woke up. Another thing that I do use is the personal compass. Working with this young person, unfortunately, there's a lot of trauma. So utilizing trauma-informed care and the personal compass to kind of make her see a map of her highs and lows that she's been through, along with her learning style. Now she is in maintenance, and one thing she has mentioned is that a physical thing I would see if she's not doing well is if her nails are unruly, because that's a part of self-care that she does every week. So she said, Zora, if I'm saying I'm fine, you can look at some physical things to know that things aren't going so well. So getting to know her as an individual was the key success to working with her.
And Alicia, have you had any experiences similar?
Yeah, so I find with kind of what Gary and Zora mentioned, one of the key things that I always kind of come back to is the fact of communication. And when working with an individual, I think sometimes we feel like just sitting down, talking to them and lecturing them is like the best form of communication. But I think for me, what has really worked when being more client directed and client centered is asking them, how best do you communicate? So once worked with a young man and his substance choice was alcohol. He kind of identified himself as being an alcoholic. But for him, he was not a talker. He wouldn't want to talk that much, but he still had a lot of stuff to say to me, and he had a lot of information he wanted to give. And how he communicated with me was through his visual art. So allowing him not to have to sit in a room with a group of people and, kind of reflect on his day, but giving him a space where he could draw or he can illustrate something, and providing him with those tools to get that done really helped, because I was listening to how he felt comfortable in communicating. And a lot of times we don't give youth that chance to, kind of take the reins on how they want to communicate. So that's my biggest tool. Is the first thing is asking them, how would you like to communicate with me?
Can you hear me now? Hello. Oh, okay, perfect. So I was just saying that we gave you a lot of tools, just like me, Jahari's window, taught you about delivering problem statements, using empathy map, using the personal compass, motivational interviewing, affirmations, and using a trauma-informed client-centered approach. So now we're going to move on to the approach to practice. So Zora, you've talked about a couple different frameworks. What other frameworks direct your practice and lead to outcomes?
So this client that I was speaking about earlier, using a wraparound approach was really helpful, connecting with family, her family lawyer, CAS workers, school workers, was really good so that we're all on the same page and we're not overwhelming the client with duplicate services. And through doing that, I found that there was an email thread that aunt, uncle, mom, dad, CAS were on, and the client was not on that email thread. And I also use a lot of narrative therapy. Through the narratives from this young person, it came out that she found that everybody was speaking about her negatively, which was really, she was internalizing it. So we had a wraparound meeting and we started including her in the email thread. So she was kind of in the loop as to what was happening, which was super helpful. And also through the narrative came up issues such as race. So her parents were of two different races. And when she went to dad's house, she really felt that she didn't belong, which was increasing her substance use. So the narrative brought out issues, family issues, racial issues, oppressive issues. So that was super helpful. Another framework that I use is being solution focused and strength based. I always ask my young people about their nouns, person, place, and things. And lastly, using a holistic approach. So I personally do oil pulling to help relieve some toxins and stuff like that. So I introduced it to my client, and what she reported back was that she's not too sure how it helped her oral health, but taking 20 minutes in the shower to just be in the moment and focus on the movement and the swishing of the water and the oil in her mouth was very grounding for her, helping her anxiety and actually helping her get to school that day.
Alicia, what approaches to praxis do you employ?
I use everything Zora uses because it's amazing. But then I also kind of use more of like a behavioral modification approach when it comes to leading to outcomes with individuals. So understanding that there's the problem that we see, but then there's also a problem underneath that iceberg that that individual is dealing with. So how can we modify a behavior and kind of create a replacement behavior to help support individuals? So instead of being more of, hey, we have to get rid of this problem, but if you get rid of a problem and you kind of have nothing to replace it, or you have no way of kind of filling that hole in a healthy manner, then your outcomes will either you'll never see your outcomes, or the outcomes could lead to something negative. So I really focus on kind of modifying individual behaviors.
And Gary, similar experiences for you, or?
Yeah, it's very similar. I think the only parts that I sometimes is when working with this young person, he had been through so many other treatment centers that a lot of the tools actually were triggering to him because they brought upon other memories. So we had to kind of recreate tools on the spot. So one of the things that we did a lot was mind mapping with him, and mind mapping out when is he doing well, what's going on in his life, when he's not doing so well, what's going on in his life, and then identifying the people, the emotions, and the places, like Zora said, that can cause static, which can bring on his urge to want to indulge more in the substance. And when we kind of walked through that, I recognized that we needed to ground them back into skills. So asking him a simple question such as, what is one thing you're proud of in the last year? And then in this case, he had a daughter. He was proud of the fact that he felt that he was being a good father. And then asking him, well, what were the skills that went into being a good father? That allowed me then to create a strength-based approach based upon skills he's already demonstrated and he identified. It wasn't from a list that I provided him. It wasn't from a general assessment. It was from actual lived experience that he unpacked himself to discuss that. And those skills helped me then to walk him through very similar models like Zora, but for him, I used more of the substance use spectrum to be able to identify when his substance use was going from non-problematic to problematic to dependent, because when he was on heroin, that was a common cycle for him that he would go through, and then being able to record and identify what do those things look like in that time. Also, because of his negative experience with treatment centers and treatments, we had to use another wraparound approach. So for him, I used the 5-person model, which was identifying a mentor in his life, identifying an accountability partner in his life, identifying a naysayer, so someone who actually doesn't want to see him succeed, identifying a confidant, and then identifying someone that he wants to invest in. And those 5 roles became his personal wraparound, which would then allow him over time to be more vulnerable, to go back into treatment and getting that more rigorous treatment, which he has, and which I've heard from him recently, and he's now 1.5 years clean by going through that process and going back to traditional treatments as well.
Very cool. So we talked about having a holistic approach, behavioral modification, using mind mapping and recreating tools, existing tools, taking a strengths-based approach, and the 5-person model, which sounds really cool. So think about what tools do you use. Have we missed any? Are there some really good ones out there that we've just completely overlooked, or not maybe applied to a different situation that you've been involved with, or would have been really helpful for the situations that we've described? Let us know. And finally, setting the context. We want to know, how do you provide a safe, respectful service? And Alicia, is it okay if I start with you?
Yeah, that's sure. So I think when it comes to providing safe and respectful service, you kind of have to start with the expectation. So everyone kind of has to put it out there on the table, like what are the roles? Like as a worker, what are my roles? And as a participant or as a client, what are your roles? It's something that I think sometimes we assume that people automatically know what a worker's role is in the situation or what that client's role should be. But, sometimes that is just an unwritten rule. So having that conversation with the individual and making sure that it is an environment that is safe for them, and kind of doing different some of like the meditation that Zora did and the container exercises, and providing them with that safe space has also really worked really well. With this young man that I worked with, one thing that we used to do with him is we used to drink tea. So he didn't really like tea at first, but it became something where he was able to associate the safety of our conversation and our space associated with having this tea, having something to drink. It was something that was warm, and it kind of set the tone for the environment and for what was to take place, and that safety was there. And also knowing that, having that conversation that the individual, that I wouldn't be really reactive with anything that was told to me, letting the individual know that, we'll talk and we may not come up with a solution today, but this is just the starting point, really helped to create a respectful kind of service for the individual, because it wasn't me being reactive and then they would reflect and they wouldn't be reactive. It would allow us to talk and then, reflect on it and then come back later and, really think about what was spoken about and then come up with a solution that was a little bit more grounded for them.
That sounds great. And I like that you started from a starting point and you keep assessing it as you were going on. Gary, do you find that you had similar experiences or?
Yeah, most certainly. Being intentional with the framework is important. And with this young man that I worked with, the framework had to quickly become a co-creation model. He had been through so much prior that I was learning from him. And as he was teaching me about who he was and the process that he needs to go through, I was able to add evidence-based frameworks for him to enhance his healing process. And what that often looks like for me is empowering the young person to be able to make decisions for themselves. So we often talk about providing options, and that provision of options allows for clear communication. So not only are we empowering, we're providing clear communication, and we're being supportive of the young people to be able to set a space, as Zora said earlier, of both physical and psychological safety for them to be vulnerable and to accept the help that they first came for and they want to continue to pursue. So when I look at providing empowerment, clear communication, and supportiveness, I look at the opposite. And the opposite is often young people who are powerless. They are not clear on what their expectations are for themselves and from others, and they feel isolated. And most of the young people that are spiraling into negative behaviors, those are probably three main points that they're experiencing in their current life. So for us to be able to switch that environment around for them and empower them, provide them clear communication, and be supportive of what they need, that is important. For this young man, being supportive was around a crisis plan for the holiday season. So it was the December holidays, and he knows that it was a triggering time of the year for him. So we created this crisis plan. And I'll be quite honest, to get him through that 2-3 week period where he typically goes into crisis and spirals out, it only cost me 3 minutes, because literally it was a minute per text, and it was a text every week, and he would respond back and we would be good. And him just knowing he had that lifeline was enough for him to continue to stay on the right path. And they often talk about options, so providing him always 3 options. He could call, he could text, he can email, so therefore he knows that there's different ways to get a hold of me. These are some of the limitations that sometimes you have within organizations, but I think sometimes you can find good community outreach workers who have that flexibility that can be a part of that team that Zora mentioned earlier, to be able to provide that level of support and service. that framework is often coming out of the impact of the social environment, which was taught to me by a mentor, John Sodden at CTI, and has been vital in the work that I do in communities to make sure young people are always feeling in a good, positive space.
And Zora?
Yeah, so in terms of respectful service, I think I always bring it back to the first question, being client focused. So for the young lady I was working with, I really had to take into account her gender, her age, her race, her socioeconomical status. And through that, through narrative discussions, came out that many of her family members that were of a higher socioeconomic status really marginalized her. So knowing that, I'm not going to come into session wearing my most fancy boots and my best purse, knowing that those little things could be a trigger for her. Secondly, I think that knowing what your ideology is for the client, going back to the concept that I mentioned of ethical postures, how do you view your client? Are they in the position that they're in due to bad choices, lack of knowledge, or is it something systemic? We have to check ourselves on how we're looking at our clients, because that's going to drive what we do. So if I found that my client was in crisis because of lack of knowledge, I'm going to provide knowledge. If I think it's bad choices, we're going to work on decision making. So bringing it back to just your thoughts, our own kind of internal CBT, like our thoughts about the client are going to affect how we behave with them. Thirdly, I think always going back to who is your client. Sometimes I find myself, if the school makes a referral and it's a young person I'm working with, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I have to get this young person back into school. But the school's not my client. Their mom's not my client. I have to focus on my client and what their goals are and what their needs are. And in terms of hats, I think that coming to me, as sometimes I'm a counselor, but I often have to be versatile. So in some context, I have to put on my advocate's hat. I have to put on my mediator hat or my negotiator hat to help this young person to where they're getting into. So we can't be so, this is what I do and this is what I'm good at. Of course, know your scope of practice and make referrals when needed, but have your own toolkit of different things that you can do and put on those hats.
Very, very good. What I was getting out of it from all three of your responses was that, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, that youth are experts in their lives, and that they can identify their triggers. They can identify some visuals if they're starting to decline, if they're not in a good place. And once you have clear, open, honest communication, you can start to help them on their journey. So we want to know what tools you're using. Make sure you stick that in the chat box. We can't wait to dive into those at the end of the discussion.
Cool. And I also wanted to add, in terms of respectful service, we have to keep updated with the research. One of my mentors always is giving me books to look at correlations between different things, new tools, new research, training, and stuff like that, because we owe it to our clients to be up to date.
Yep. Right on. So we'll go to the next slide. This is, yeah, that's the one. That's the one. I love this slide. I also love Pinterest. And this is about that youth work is less like Instagram and less like curated photos and more like Pinterest fails, right? You have an idea what how you want to help them. You have all the tools, you have a vision of what it's going to look like, but sometimes it just doesn't turn out the way you hoped. But it still means you need to celebrate it. It's still a win. Although it didn't happen the way that you wanted to in the time frame, how you wanted to, where, it still happened, or something's happened. So celebrate it. Managing your expectations versus reality, and the change or the final outcome that you want for your client isn't always promised. So you need to remove your bias and yourself and help your client objectively and altruistically. And it starts with you, but it's not all about you. And you just got to know that some days you'll be tucking in a creepy broccoli bear covered in a egg blanket, but that's okay. It's okay. We'll go to the next slide. Great, and this is the journey that we took with you today. We employed in a reflective practice throughout the webinar itself. Through the description, we were defining problems and defining terms. We were evaluating feelings through your questions and evaluation through polls, doing analysis through our approaches to practice, and we really can't wait to see what some of your approaches to practice are. Action plan, providing with you more tools and additional resources, which is coming up after this, and you know, talking about what else could we do, how can we improve, how can we make things better. And now we're right back at the beginning, describing what happened. Isn't that amazing? What an amazing journey. Next. So we went through a lot of tools and resources today. I'll just recap some of them. Just like me, Johari's window, we talked about problem statements. We talked about using Myers-Briggs and empathy mapping. We talked about identifying learning styles, behavioral motivation, motivational interviewing, the 5-person model, which is really cool. You should totally look into that. Using an intentional framework. We didn't say harm reduction, using a harm reduction approach, but I think that was kind of implied throughout how we work and how we should be working with youth and substance abuse or substance use. Are there any ones that I've forgotten? Ones you want to add?
No, I think you got them all.
Well, you guys word vomited them out. Every time we've practiced this, I've had to write down new tools every time. So yeah, what's next? Great.
So this next activity was actually created by a young person, and a young person referred it to myself in a counseling session that she finds it super helpful. So we just wanted to share it with you guys.
Hi, this is Amanda Sundberg, and this is to help you slow down and feel a little bit more present. Place your feet firmly on the ground. Feel it steady beneath you. You are tethered to the earth. Now pay attention to your body. Focus on what it feels like if you stroke your tongue against the roof of your mouth. Try running your fingertips along the inside of your arms and your wrists. Now place your hands in front of you. Clasp them together. Place them on your head and pull down. Focus on the raising of your body hair, the way that your lungs feel as they fill with air, the goosebumps, the sweat from each pore, all of the little functions that work together to make up the resilient being that is you. Now make your back as straight as you can. Your feet are still roots in the ground. But now there's this silver wire connecting you from your crown to the sky. Now breathe in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. You are here. And you are real.
Yeah, sometimes it's important to remember that we are real and we are here. We get so flustered in this work, day-to-day life that we're just go, go, go. So slowing down our day sometimes is super important.
So that's our presentation on being able to use reflective practice. Showed you what the reflective practice model looks like a few slides ago, but you can also just ask yourself the questions, what, so what, and now what. You can do that with while you're working one-on-one with your youth. You can do that while you're in a group setting when you're trying to problem solve maybe some bigger issues as well. Yeah, today was fun. It was a lot of fun. We hope you enjoyed it, and we are looking forward to seeing some of your questions.
Okay, thanks everyone. We did have a few folks share some affirmations around a lot of the strategies and tools that you all were sharing. Having clients come up with their own frameworks to direct the work, using strengths-based approaches, approaches to developing rapport with youth. There was a question though, and I wonder, Gary, if you can unpack this a little bit. There was a specific question around the 5-person model, and if you could take a moment to sort of explain in a little more detail what that model looks like.
Yeah, no problem. So the 5-person model is it's a model we designed a while back, and have used with young people to help them to design their own personal I forgot, Ron, we're live now. their own personal wraparound and support. So when you're looking at the model, you put this, if you're drawing it out, you would draw it out with the person in the center, and then you'd have a circle around who they are. And there's 5 roles that you want. So the first role is, who's their mentor? So do they have a mentor in their life, and can they connect with a mentor? The second role is an accountability partner. So somebody to keep them accountable to the things they say they were going to do. Often we confuse mentor with accountability partner, and those are 2 very different roles, and they should be separated, because mentors in the truest sense sometimes accept a young person's errors and mistakes as part of the mentoring process. But accountability partners have a different measurement of accountability for the young person to be able to follow through with what they've said they're going to follow through with. Then you have a confidant. A confidant is a person in a young person's life that they can trust to share their deepest stuff with, emotional, static issues that they're experiencing, and know that that confidant is someone that is going to hold on to that. I've come to find that most confidants, when we're working with young men, are often their romantic partners or their intimate partners. They believe there's a trust level there. So you can work through that and see if that's a safe place for them to go, or if we need to expand and go further. Then you have what we call the naysayer, a very important role in a young person's life. We often talk about trying to eliminate all the negativity and all of the stuff from people that don't have positive vibes for us. But the naysayer is important, because without the naysayer, that motivation to actually do more than you can isn't there, doesn't exist. It's important to have that naysayer in your life. It's not important to have that naysayer as a part of your everyday life, but it's important to identify who that person is. And I've come to find for a lot of young people, unfortunately, that's a teacher that they've come into encounter with, or that's a parent or an uncle or an aunt. It's often an older person in their life that has acted in an authoritative role towards them that they look as their naysayer. And then the person who they want to invest in is the 5th role. You gotta be working to invest into somebody. And that investment could be whether it's financial, whether it could be resources, whether it could be just being connected. They got to be able to invest in somebody and be doing this for somebody more than just themselves as well. Now, when you draw that circle out for that young person and they have those roles, what we've come to find is that sometimes they have too many of one role. So they have like 6 mentors, but no accountability partners. When I draw it as a visual, you end up getting a circle. If you have all of the roles as one, you get a circle. And the visual is that a circle moves. And if you have one part of the circle, too many mentors, it's going to block the circle from moving. So you could look at yourself as saying, I'm an awesome person. I got 6 mentors. I got no naysayers in my life. Your circle will not move accordingly. You'll get stuck with your mentors. It's a visual activity that is really cool. And we're happy to share it if anybody would like to go deeper with it, ReDesign Group is happy to go further and be able to unpack it for any individual client that you might be working with, and your personal self too. I do it for myself, and it's a good one that we all do.
Gary, just a follow-up question, who might be an accountability partner?
So I've come to find an accountability partner for a lot of the young people that we work with. I'll go back to the young man. The young man that I was working with, his accountability partner was his imam back at the mosque. It was a person that was not going to mentor him, but a person that was going to keep him accountable to what he wanted to be doing. In my life, my accountability partner is my own mother, where she's not mentoring me no more. That's past, that's long gone. But she's keeping me accountable to the things that need to be happening. Sometimes you'll find an accountability partner is the evolution of a mentor. There was somebody that once was a mentor, but now they've shifted into an accountability partner role. And I've come to learn through my years of working with young people, a lot of the roles that I played mentorship to, I'm now accountability partner. I'm not mentoring no more. They're teaching me new stuff. Now I'm keeping them accountable to the things they've put forth into the world for themselves. So if you had to sum it up, an accountability partner is probably the evolution of a mentor in a young person's life.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of people are really curious about all of the various tools and strategies and resources we've discussed today. So maybe one of the things that we can do after today's presentation is compile everything that you've shared and discussed, and then YouthREX can share that with our webinar participants and also on our Exchange website, where we host hundreds of resources to support youth work. So these tools that you shared would be really helpful, I think, in that context and for everyone today. In the meantime, though, I wonder, there was a question about the Just Like Me exercise. If you could go over that one more time for folks who are participating today.
Okay, for sure. So the Just Like Me exercise is really to build empathy and compassion with the young person we're working with. Oftentimes, social distance is so high that we're unable to see the person, that they're a person just like me. Brings a little bit of a humanitarian thing, and you can kind of reflect this practice by yourself. So the client doesn't really have to be involved in that. That's a personal thing. So looking at just like me, this is a human being. These are their wants. These are their needs, and it kind of helps drive and create goals, and embeds you into them a little bit too. And for myself personally, I found that Amanda discussed celebrations. I think that when I did the Just Like Me activity, I was like, this person hasn't celebrated anything in so long. And just like me, like I celebrate a holiday called Eid, this person doesn't have any celebration. So creating some celebrations when they go to school for a whole week. At the end of the week, we might grab some sushi or something like that. So just small celebrations, because just like me, they need that too.
That's good. We did have someone share, I love to accommodate my clients in an environment that is safe, such as allowing them to feel comfortable and at ease. One or two clients will bring in their iPods or cell phones and share with me a rap song that is meaningful and resonates with them. Interestingly, they will rap to the music, sing, and they think it's a healing process. So that's just an approach that someone shared that connects to some of the ideas that were brought forward today about how to build rapport with the youth with whom we work. Other people are sharing, again, using a strengths-based approach, using a circle of support. If you have tools, if you're listening in or participating today, please feel free to share. We do have another question for the group. In your practice, how do you work with and or help an individual with substance use and mental illness and trauma?
So, it's not, I want to say it's not any different. It's still compassion first, client centered first, and identifying where are we going. So we do an activity often called Whose Problem Is It? And being able to help to unpack whose problem are we trying to solve. So even though we know they have all of these issues that are undiagnosed or diagnosed, we still have to identify where do they want to go. Just because they have a diagnosis doesn't put us in the driver's seat. They're still in the driver's seat. So the activity, and I mean, there's some resource I think that we can share around unpacking whose problem is it. But that's the way that I've often done it in my practice, and it's allowed for greater vulnerability because it still keeps the client centered and it still keeps me present to be addressing immediate concerns and such. But I also know that in Zora's practice, she sees more clients this way, and Alicia's practice as well. So I'll let them share.
Yeah, I actually use a tool that's really good by Ricky Greenwald called Mapping Out a Problem. And oftentimes what I find is that the problem behavior is usually the mental health. So anxiety, depression, not being able to get up. And then we ask them the emotions, feelings around it, which is usually triggers from trauma. And from that comes the quick response behavior, which is usually substance abuse. So I think so the first one would be the problem behavior is usually a mental health behavior. So extreme anxiety, depression, not being able to go to school. The emotions around that are usually entrenched in trauma. So the trauma triggers. I usually do a trauma history with a young person. And for trauma resolution, if they're ready for it, it would be EMDR, but kind of looking at where the client is. And it's so important to have consult and a mentor, because oftentimes I'll feel like this client is ready for trauma resolution, and then my mentor will be like, no, you got to work on the substance first. And of course, asking the client too, right? Their self-determination is the most important. So emotions and feelings are usually entrenched in the trauma, and then the quick response behavior to deal with the emotion is substance abuse. And then we'll send you guys the map, but then it kind of goes to, if this continues, we do an activity called future movies. Which is super helpful, looking at, is this worth it to continue this? How bad could it get? And if things did get better and I did replace it with whatever positive behavior it is, what image would that look at? And we kind of, for our visual learners, we make them play it kind of like a movie. So that's a really good tool that incorporates mental health, trauma, and substance abuse, because oftentimes it's hardly one in isolation, right? It's usually the three of them or at least two of them present. And we're seeing that a lot of schools now have special programs for mental health and substance use together. So you have to have both of those components to be entered in certain programs. So I think that the larger community is also seeing that all of these three things are interconnected. We keep it holistic, use some MST. I think we're on the right route.
So I also have two things to add to that. So it kind of relates to what Zora was saying, but CBT, so just looking at emotions, thoughts, and behaviors and how they all link together really does allow us to kind of target each of these areas. And it works well because you actually see how they work together and how they're actually playing on each other, or how one impacts the other way. So CBT questions I find always work. Disclaimer though, they can be quite triggering when it comes to CBT, because it is more of an experimental thing where you want the person, when they're actually in that situation and they're feeling those thoughts, which one could be triggering, but then it could also create an unsafe environment. So it's definitely something that you know, I wouldn't do if I'm not completely confident in my relationship with the individual. But then it also plays on the fact that once you're dealing with like three different things, or in my practice, I see a lot of like dual diagnosis is happening. So one thing I really stress is multidisciplinary kind of wraparound approach. So when we talk about wraparound, we talk about the family and things like that, but what about working together? You know, that's one thing I love is, you know, I get to work with the ReDesign Group where we all bring, you know, different elements and different practices together. So, you know, don't be afraid to reach out to, you know, the expert in mental health, but then also reach out to someone who is an expert in substance abuse, and how can you guys bring your knowledge together? So I can't stress that, you know, the multidisciplinary, we can't all be experts in everything, but there are experts out there, so let's work together.
Okay, we have a comment and a related question. So this comes from one of our participants today. I am a mentorship coordinator trying to better support the volunteers, children, youth, and families, but the resources we have are limited because we are a charitable organization, which makes me feel overworked and overwhelmed. So what are ways we can empower our mentors through suggested resources you may have access to?
It's on.
So great question, and I appreciate the problem statement. It helps me to really unpack and know where we're going. It's a common issue. 'Cause I think Zora pointed it out very clearly. Organizations are just beginning to recognize the holistic approaches needed to address these issues and not to address them in isolation and by themselves. So we're still probably a ways away from being able to have like complete resources to be able to support young people. I can only reflect upon my own personal experience with lack of resources, and that's typically where I bring in the wider community. There's a broader community out there that is not connected to the youth serving sector, but is connected to the health and wellness sector. And when I can bring that community in, we often are able to facilitate discounts, free options, meetup nights, group settings, various different approaches that can be able to meet the young person's their resources and their needs that they have, and be able to meet what I have. One of the ones that I love is there's an acupuncture place here in Toronto that I recently introduced to, and they go through a great model, and it's a great space for introverts. It's very calming. It's created out of safety, and it allows for me to further expand the network to be able to support young people, recognizing that our sector itself, it lacks resources and it's not often there. So as a mentor, as a person in the community, I would begin to explore who are the health providers in my community and who are the people providing care in those aspects, and seeing how they want to engage with our young people.
Yeah, and I agree. There's services and things out there, but just the awareness of them. So I think that YouthREX, I know you guys have the platform to share the information. So there's the new What's Up walk-ins, which are now in Durham region all across, and they have an aspect called telepsychiatry. So getting access to diagnosis and psychiatrists via video. So I think with technology, we can definitely be moving forward in terms of getting services with not as much financial resources.
But I also think it's really important that you take care of yourself. If you're not, you know, if you when you did the initial the tally this morning and you didn't tally very high, well, let's start there. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, because if you're not in a good space to take care of yourself, you can't possibly help be in the best place to help your clients, to help your community, to help the mentors, to help the volunteers. So take care of yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, if you are doing work from a remote community, I think, as Zora said, reaching out beyond your geographical network. YouthREX is doing a great job of connecting those communities and those people together. So I think that we should really utilize that and make this a broader community for wellness, so that later on we can advocate as a broader community to be able to bring those resources to agencies in remote regions and also in urban settings as well.
I also think when it comes to mentors, celebrating them as well is also a big thing we don't do as often. I think a lot of times we're so focused on the problem, we forget to, you know, celebrate those in the community, celebrate those mentors, celebrate the little things. And it could be something as simple as, you know, sending an e-card that says thank you. I don't think we say thank you enough sometimes in situations, and it actually really goes a long way to like just let someone know, like, thank you for helping.
Well, thank you all for responding to that question. We have another question from a participant. Does your practice change at all when dealing with mandated clients where resistance might be an issue?
So I can definitely speak to this. Mandated clients are personally my favorite clients, because if they weren't mandated, we wouldn't have access to them. So having that mindset that if they weren't forced to come here, they wouldn't be accessing any resources. And I find that they come in with almost no expectation and kind of hostile towards it. So you can only kind of go up from there, right? And engaging them, like getting a hook, just like me, everybody has a passion for something. So I can even speak to an experience where when I was working at Breaking the Cycle, the Youth Gang Exit Program, I had a client who was mandated, and we didn't take mandated clients, but we did his intake, and he was like, I don't want to do this. This is not for me. So we did the initial interview, and due to, I guess, house arrest conditions and stuff like that, he's like, at least I can leave my house to come here. And he started coming to the program. All he had was grade 8 education. He studied so hard, got into college, really turned it around, and he was one of my personal biggest success stories, and he was mandated. So kind of being like, I know you don't want to be here. accepting that and kind of like validating that. Like, I know you don't want to be here. It sucks that you're in the position that you're in, but you're here now. How can we make this something that's engaging for you? At the time, he was into wanting to do a clothing line, so we looked at grants that he could apply for to get that done. He was into music, so we do check-in using different songs. So really using that conflict and resistance as a skill. I think there's like a martial arts that does that, right?
Yes. There's no, I don't. It's
Aikido or something.
Aikido,
yeah.
yes.
So kind of using that principle, like reaching out to other things. And like we said, we're not experts in everything, but just using your own personal. My undergrad was in criminology, and using differential opportunity theory to see that, okay, these are the opportunities that you had, and this is the route that you went. How can we still achieve those things? So like Alicia mentioned, just replacing negatives with positives and embracing it that, hey, you're mandated and you're here, and this is work. Sometimes I don't want to be here either, and that's okay, but let's just make the best of this.
Yeah, it really fits in with that impact of the social environment. I'm empowering you, acknowledging the fact that I know you don't want to be here. I'm making a clear communication that I'm aware of this, you're aware of this, but how are we going to make this the best? And supporting you by saying, how are we going to make the best out of this? Not how are you going to make the best out of this, but we. So I love all of that.
Yeah.
Another question that came up during the presentation, how do you use a sort of a strengths-based approach, and what would a sort of aha question be when you're working with youth who use substances as a normal part of their daily life in order to identify for them that the use of substances may be problematic for them in their day-to-day lives?
I think the first thing is to recognize where they are on the stages of change. Right? So if they're totally in pre-contemplation, you have to kind of roll with the resistance, and they have to have the aha moment that, hey, maybe this is a problem. Mapping out the problem works great for that, and just engaging them. And you know what? Maybe in the moment, if they're in pre-contemplation, they don't want to work on that. They want to work on something else. Oftentimes, substance impacts various parts of our life that we want to improve. So just getting them to navigate themselves through that themselves. Otherwise, it's going to kind of be futile to just be like, you shouldn't be doing this, or let's focus on your substance, and that's not where their mind space is. That might come naturally once they gain employment and they're like, hey, my substance is impacting this, or it's impacting me economically, letting it naturally flow to that.
I think it's also important to remember that that aha moment may come months after, it may come years after that you've been working with them. It may not come right away, but when it does come, it really is more impactful, and not to kind of on our end to expect. I feel like when I first started in the field, I expected that aha, that light bulb to turn on like after my 5th session with someone, and then I was really hard on myself, like why haven't they gotten it yet? But I've worked with many individuals where 2-3 years later, I'm getting that text message or that email, like, you remember the time you told me about this? Well, I get it now, it makes sense. So also kind of remembering that aha moment, let it happen naturally and organically. Like if you give the individuals the tools and the resources and you help them walk through it, that aha moment may not come right away.
I think it's almost sweeter when it comes later on as well. Like when it comes unexpected and you go, yeehaw, this happened, this is great. Yeah.
And I think Alicia was, we were talking about this the other day, that we're in a society where we want results like right now. Like single session, we want you to leave here with all these things and it to be amazing. But oftentimes for it to be real, it's going to be long term. And I kind of agree with Alicia that usually it's like way later. You kind of plant the seed, put the foundation down, and when they're ready to access it, they have it there.
I mean, I think we can all speak to a time that we worked with a young person and we thought they weren't getting it, and it wasn't picking up. And we see them later and it's this explosion of it's understood and they got it. I'm seeing one now where a lot of young people I worked with back in 2007, 2009, they're coming to me now and talking about these vegan lifestyles and whole food lifestyles, and drinking tea is now their new weed rolling in the morning. And it's like, back then you were completely resistant to these things, but it just took time. And then being confident in your intentional approach and your compassion, it'll come. It'll be as it's going to be.
We titled today's webinar Youth and Substance Use. And one of the questions we had from a participant, why do some agencies use the term substance abuse rather than substance misuse? And do you think that the word abuse has a negative connotation as it relates to clients?
I think it's also all about like your intentions and your vibe. So the word abuse, if you look at it's abnormal, right? So you're abnormally using something. You're using something to help your anxiety. You're using something to focus. And are you using that thing abnormally? So I think that we get so caught up in like language and discourse and stuff like that, but it's all about, you can use the word substance abuse, but if your vibe is compassionate and you're being empathetic and you're working with the young person and you're engaged, I don't think they're gonna focus too much on the words.
Yeah, and it's the evolution of the language. I think agencies, they're becoming more aware of how they're speaking of the people they serve and the communities they serve, and are trying to be more mindful of how they use it. So I'm similar with Zora. I often don't even use the word substance use when I'm speaking with young people. You know, I often just talk about, you know, them and who they are, because they are before the use of any substance. And if we're talking about substance and use, those are very broad terms, you know. So, and when it comes to substance abuse, I typically stay away from that because the word itself sometimes can be very abrasive. So like Zora said, if I'm not saying it from a real compassionate place, just saying it itself is abrasive. Forget about the meaning behind it.
And labels in general, right? We've evolved from using the term at-risk use. Clients that I work with that have eating disorders, like the label anorexia. So just even looking into like the research around it, and just ask the client, hey, I'm calling it this, like, how do you feel about it? And oftentimes they're like, no, I don't like when you say that, let's call it this instead. So taking their lead on language too.
We're coming to the end of the webinar, but we wanted to ask you all, how did you form the ReDesign Group? How did you all come together?
So the ReDesign Group came together, what was it, maybe 3 years ago? Maybe 3 years ago. It first came together during a time when our funding for our program was in the air, and we were all unemployed, sitting at a coffee shop thinking, how do we impact communities still with no money in our pockets, but issues still being there? And we decided to do an art exhibition around young people and how to see them differently. And then from that art exhibition, we all evolved from a program that's no longer existing, and we came together as a multi-service group, using all of our skills together. Like Alicia said earlier, we all bring something different to the table. And when we came to it, we look at things in such a different way, and we're able to then engage with communities differently. So in our everyday, we say our Clark Kent, we all have our other jobs, other agencies that we're working with, and other flow, but we come together, we redesign almost like Superman to be able to serve communities in those margins that agencies are unable to cross those boundaries. That's when you can kind of call on us, and we're there. I don't know if you guys want to add anything else to our origin story.
Well, I mean, I wasn't part of, I'm like the tag along friend. I got involved in the project, and they keep letting me come back. So I think I'm doing something okay.
We need you. Yeah, and it's good that we're not like, we all personally work for agencies in terms of work, but like when we come together, we don't have to respond to a funder. We don't have to, we can be very,
Fluid.
yeah, very fluid, very versatile, very like we kind of answer kind of to ourselves and have our own energies.
Which I encourage you to, if you're in a space, build a team like this. Like, it just helps with your psychological safety to have a team at the end of any day you can turn back to, and they can become my 5 roles within a team itself.
And we started out by doing a MOOC. Do you remember we started that massive open online course, and then I don't think we finished it though. We got so sidetracked. Our distractions are the best. Those are the best things about us. But yeah, find a group that you love. Find people that vibe with you. Find people that will keep you accountable, that will push you, that will, you know, tickle your brain.
Thank you all so much. Thanks again to Alicia, Amanda, Gary, and Zora from the ReDesign Group for sharing your insights and experiences. We've had so much feedback from folks thanking you all for this amazing presentation. People are very impressed with the ways in which you were able to address the topic today. And we will, again, work with the ReDesign Group here at YouthREX to compile a lot of the tools, strategies, and resources that were shared. And we will share these with all of today's participants and everyone who registered for the webinar. And we will make those resources available on the exchange as soon as we're able to compile them.